There was somebody on NPR who used to say they were like a poet and a large animal veterinarian. Remember that?
Baxter Black.
Baxter Black, yeah. All right, well, let me start with the first question. What is your ethics framework, if you can say that succinctly in about 2 minutes?
Well, that's a wonderful question, Maria, thanks. So what I was going to say is, as a part of this project, we have developed this draft ethics framework. And what is an ethics framework? So an ethics framework is a tool, and there's different kinds of ethics frameworks, but basically an ethics framework is a tool to help people identify ethical considerations that are relevant to, say, a policy or a practice or a program that's being examined. So to identify ethical considerations and to organize them and to guide reflection about them. And there's different ethics frameworks in the literature. So we've created a draft ethics framework for this project. And our aspiration, if we get this grant that we put in, is to take this draft ethics framework and convene a group of stakeholders and have them try and use it, have them pilot the ethics framework to think through a policy, and then get feedback from them. Like, is it useful? Is it usable? Does it capture everything that they think is important?
Yeah. Thank you, Anne. That's terrific. I can't wait to see how that it turns out. I sure hope you get the grant. It'd be great.
Thank you. And I just want to add to that I had to explain to farmers what practical ethics is, which, by the way, is super fun to do. And they love this idea of the tool. They love the idea that ethics is not something that's up in an ivory tower, that it's something that can be useful to them, it's something that they could participate in. That piece, I think, was really compelling.
So encouraging to hear that. Yeah. Questions? Yeah, Travis, please say your name and where you're from.
Yes, I'm Travis Reeder, and I'm from the Berman Institute of Bioethics. And this question is for Professors Kingsley and Bonds. And first, I just want to say I really loved your presentation, and I found it very, very powerful. I think early on, one of the things you said was an emergent theme, or some of the comments we heard came out about policing and profiling. And so given the current moments at the campus, you have this big question, which is what responsibilities have you incurred by hearing these stories, or what responsibilities should we incur when we hear these stories? And so I guess I just wondered if you have any contact, or if you have any insights about whether there's been contact with this new conversation about campus policing.
It's a really tough question. I think this is kind of the ethical space we find ourselves in over and over again, is what is our obligation to act and where does it lie? As teachers, the easy answer, the beginning answer is in educating our students, and I think that the value of this project for us has been to imagine how we continue to engage our students in this work and how committed we are to doing that, and to sensitizing how we train students in the humanities with these questions. Certainly this question of campus security is one that's very much on their mind as well. Did you have something?
I think more directly to I mean, it's so interesting because I think I can locate probably about 2 or 3 interviews where this came up. And it's so interesting because it came up as an extension to certain staff being assaulted by management, right? And so their question was, well, where is the policing of the management? Like, how can someone put their hand on me and nothing be done? And so for them, there was like this ongoing kind of a contradiction between what the university wants to do in terms of its own self in relationship to Baltimore City, but there's so many actions that take place within the work environment that need a similar kind of policing, but we don't think about the policing of outside of the university as the same as the policing that may need to go on within a workspace. And I'm using policing in the most kind of generic way, not just in an actual physical way.
That just put me in mind. One of the points we cut for sake of time, but we felt was a very important outcome of our project, is the ways in which it recharts sort of who is Hopkins and what is Baltimore, and really thinking about how Baltimore is here, and Hopkins is, all of us, when we talk about Hopkins as an enterprise, we talk about the students, we talk about the education, we talk about the research, right? This is our beginning point. Even all the people we interviewed, this is their beginning point. But broadening that, what does that then mean for an initiative like that in terms of the questions we should raise as we go through the process of considering this?
Other questions? I have a question then for the Housing Our Story project. Can you summarize for us as succinctly as possible? I know it's hard. But what am I saying? It's impossible. I'm just really curious. You were saying at the beginning that you're changing the way the archives look now.
Yeah.
And what's the biggest difference, say, before and after? Like, how's it going to be different in ways that are ethically relevant?
That's hard.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Well, so I would say two things to that. One, I would say that the beginning of our project was really charting what's there in our university archive, but also in terms of Baltimore archives. And what we find, typically, because archives sort of naturally grew out of the efforts to preserve the records of institutions, you know, if we just want to throw out kind of a quantifiable number, maybe there were 3 records we could find that were actually authored by Black staff. And there was a lot of interest in firsts. So who's the first Black student to come to the university? These kinds of questions. In Baltimore writ large, there's a little bit of that as well. That is, the archives themselves are somewhat segregated. So by sheer quantity, now we have a documentation of all the people that we've interviewed and all of their voices. So exponentially, we've increased the quantity. The second part of my answer is that, in essence, we are archiving the present, and the present is becoming historical as we archive it and as we talk about it. So we are documenting our moment now as people are living it and experiencing it. And that's quite different from a typical archival project, which would focus more on the past. But in documenting the present, we're also documenting the memories of the past and how they are narrated in this moment. So how do we talk about West Baltimore in the 60s? How do we talk today about West Baltimore in the 60s versus how perhaps it might have been talked about in the 60s? How has our language changed, and you can speak to this better than me, but about our ability to talk about racism and the language we put to it.
I think I'd also like to add, when we were speaking with archivists about putting or archiving people's stories, we thought it would be a great idea to actually archive this process as well. So it's important when students reflect on their interview and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm witnessing the use of colorblind language. Like this is historically significant. They can identify it, so it like turns theory into practice. Like that is going to be part of a larger kind of narrative. And so when I forgot what your initial question was, my mind.
Just curious if you could help us understand more about how the archives are actually changing.
Changing, right.
In 3 directions.
And I think the other part in terms of changing the archive, I think that the more and more stories that you have that offer a different narrative, I think it will inevitably force to change the dominant narrative. But you can't even begin that process until you start to collect stories that offer something different. And I think also collecting stories helps to change the culture, and it signals to the public, this is a space where you can say what is happening, and we will do our best to make sure that no retaliation occurs because of it.
So exciting. And I think you're showing how history is just alive, and with all of the good and bad aspects of being alive. Yeah. We have one more. Go ahead, Deborah. Please say your name and where you're from.
Deborah Matthews, Berman Institute of Bioethics. You mentioned, I'm sorry, I have a family member who's a farmer, but my question's for them. You mentioned resistance on the part of some of the folks that you approached for interviews, not only to be interviewed, but then like some kinds of restrictions that they might want to put on their recordings. How many people, what percentage of the folks that you approached either declined to participate out of concern or ask that restrictions be put on access or use of their interview.
I was gonna borrow from her book and say I have a qualitative answer rather than a quantitative answer, which is we had a couple students made appointments and showed up for interviews and waited for hours, and people just never showed up. And that experience happened a few times.
Yeah, and I think one student was rejected by 6 different people, 6 or 7 different people. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can't give you a percentage, but enough to comment on.
And did you place any restrictions on any of the interviews that you did?
No one who agreed to be interviewed placed those restrictions, but I did think that many of us who did the interviewing felt that people, as the student expressed herself, that people were cautious in how they were talking about what they wanted to talk about.